Today we're going to talk about tefillah, the prayer, the daily prayer, its obligation, its origin. Briefly about the origin, and then the Mishnah, what the Mishnah says about the obligation of daily prayer. So many of the poskim are of the opinion that the obligation of prayer is rabbinical, meaning it's not a biblical commandment. There's no commandment in the Torah that says that you must pray, but rather it's rabbinical. When you think about it as rabbinical, it's not a commandment really, because one cannot command a person to pray. What you could do is to command someone to read text, but not to pray, because prayer is a spiritual thing, something that really has to move a person emotionally and spiritually. And you see it in schools, in religious schools, where the teachers monitor the kids to see if they're praying. All they see is that the kid is holding the siddur, is following with his finger or her finger exactly where you're supposed to be. According to Maimonides, it's mitzvah min Torah, and he says mitzvah ta'aseh litpalel kol yom, sheneimar va'avadetem et Hashem Elohechem. It's according to Maimonides only. It's a biblical commandment. It derives it from the pasuk, you should serve Hashem, avadetem et Hashem. And he says this kind of service is tefillah, avodah shebalev. And what Maimonides says that originally the tefillah and the biblical commandment was to pray once a day in any language, any phrase, any style that fits you in any language. And so, for example, the one just says God willing, or inshallah, or please God during the day once, it's already considered tefillah. Then Maimonides adds that was from Moshe Rabbeinu ad Ezra. People prayed in their own style, probably mostly using Tehillim and other biblical passages. But it says, "Kevan shegalu Yisrael b'mei Nebuchadnezzar HaRasha," says, but after the exile, they were exiled to Bavel. They got assimilated. They lost their language. They couldn't speak Hebrew. כשהיה אחד ונתפלל, תקצר לשונו לשאול חפציו ולהגיד שבח הקדוש ברוך הוא בלשון הקודש. They weren't able to express their prayers in Hebrew, and they always resorted to other languages. And because of that, Ezra Bedino, Ezra the scribe, and his rabbinical court created the 18 Berakhot, which we call Berakhot HaAmidah. So that is the traditional approach, that the prayers as we have them were established by what we call Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, or Ezra the scribe, when they came back from Bavel, which is around the 5th century before the Common Era, and that gives the prayer an age of 2,500 years. Scholarship thinks differently. I'm not going to give an answer now which one is correct, but the academic research into the background of tefillah shows that almost until the end of the period of the destruction of the temple, which is the 1st century of the Common Era, there was no established prayer in the sense of Amidah or Berachot or anything like that, but rather there were certain things that were said in the temple, and the rest of the country, people would just say what they felt like saying. And also in terms of the language, when you look at the language of the 18 Berachot, they point more towards a 1st, 2nd century literature than something that is from the almost biblical period 500 years earlier. So it's a gap of 500, 600 years, but also a gap of authority where the tefillot come from. And we see this tension in the Mishnah. The Mishnah, we look at Masechet Berachot, Perek Dalet, Mishnah Gimel. It's the 4th chapter, 3rd Mishnah. And we find this, רבן גמליאל אומר, בכל יום מתפלל אדם 18. רבי יהושע אומר, מעין 18. רבי עקיבא אומר, שגורה תפילתו בפיו, יתפלל 18, ואם לאו, 118. So it's a triple mahloket, a triple dispute between Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Akiva. All lived in the end of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century. So this is after the destruction. Rabbi Akiva, we know, was involved in the Bar Kokhba revolt in the year 132 to 135. So this is around this time. Rabban Gamliel says you have to pray every day 18 Berachot. Like the Amidah, this is the core part of the prayer, the silent prayer where we say 18, which are now 19, but back in the day was 18 Berakhot. And here's another sort of like fact that creates a problem to say that the Berakhot were established much earlier at the time of Ezra, because Rabban Gamliel says you have to pray 18 Berakhot, and but they say that the 19th was created in his time. So why doesn't he say 19? So it means that they first, Rabban Gamliel established the rule of saying 18 Berakhot, and then he added, probably because of the fear of Christianity, the 19th Berakhah, which is to push the heretics or the Christians out of the synagogue. But the fact that you have a mahloket, you have a dispute, it's still in the first century, means that it's still fresh. It was just created back then, according to that. So Rabban Gamliel says that you have to pray 18 Berachot every day. מתפלל אדם בכל יום 18. Rabbi Yoshua אומר, מעין 18. Rabbi Yoshua disagrees. He says, to say the full Amidah, as we say it today, is too much. Meaning that if Rabbi Yoshua, which is a great scholar 2,000 years ago, would come into one of the synagogues today and would see that we all say 18 Berachot in every one of the tefillot, he say, wow, you are really righteous people. You are much stricter than I am. As Rabbi Yoshua would say that. What is the Me'ain Shmoneh Esrei that Rabbi Yoshua is referring to? It's the first 3 Berachot, the full text, and the last 3 Berachot, the full text, because they are the frame of the Amidah. But in between, the middle 12 Berachot are replaced by this text. Havinenu Adonai Eloheinu lada'at derachecha, umol et levavenu li'iratecha, ותסלח לנו להיות גאולים ורחקנו ממכאוב ודשננו בנות ארצך ונפוצותינו מרבע תקבץ והטועים על דעתך ישפטו ועל הרשעים תניף ידיך וישמחו צדיקים בבניין עירך ובתיקון נחלך ובצמיחת קרן לידי ירדך ובעריכת נר לבן ישי משיחך טרם לקראת התענה ברוך אתה השם שומע תפילה. It's a very short, right? This is like the whole Amidah is folded into one beracha, which if you translate would say, give us the wisdom to know your ways, heal our heart to revere you, forgive us to be redeemed, drive us away from illness, let us enjoy the abundance of your land, bring us from the 4 corners of the earth, judge those who drifted away from you, punish the wicked, let the righteous rejoice with the rebuilding of your city and reestablishment of your temple and the flourishing of the dynasty of David and the coming of the Mashiach. Before we call you, you answer. Thank Baruch Ata Hashem Shomea Tefillah. It's very nice.
You find this in Sidurim?
Yeah, you find some Sidurim. In Rinat Yisrael, some Sidurim.
That's the view of Rabbi Akiva.
That's Rabbi Yoshua.
Rabbi Yoshua.
So we have 2 extremes. Rabban Gamliel says every day the full version. Rabbi Yoshua says every day the short version, the abridged version. Rabbi Akiva gives us the compromise. He says, "Im shegura tefilato befiv, yitpalel 18, v'im lav me'en 18." So if you feel comfortable with it and you know it by heart, say the full tefillah. But if not, say the abridged version. So most people look at this Mishnah as the end all. This is the Mishnah that tells us what is the Amidah. There was a triple-headed mahloket, the full, the abridged version, or a choice between them. And the ruling was that, like Rabbi Akiva, that if you know it, you pray the full tefillah, and if not, you pray the short tefillah. But because we have Sidurim, and everybody has easy access to the full tefillah, we say the whole thing. But there's a Mishnah before and a Mishnah after that. Both of them tell us a different story, a little bit. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, this is Mishnah Daled, ha'oseh tefilato keva, en tefilato tahanunim. So what is tefilato keva? Says Rabbi Ovadia of Bartinoro, who's the commentator here, שתפילתו דומה עליו כמסעוי, ולשון קבע שאומר חוק קבוע עליי להתפלל, וצריך אני לצאת ממנה. So like written 500 years ago in Italy, right? That sounds very modern Hebrew. ואני צריך לצאת מזה. Like, just let me, what do I have to do? I have to read this page to that page, let me come, punch my card, read the tefillah, let me go home. Or go to work, or whatever I need to do. Right? Rabbi Eliezer says, if this is your tefillah, and tefillah tahanunim, there's no element of supplication, of emotion, of spirituality in your tefillah, and it's not good. And this is what happens today in synagogues, and what happened for 2,000 years in synagogues. We find people complain about people talking, not paying attention for the last 2,000 years. It's not a new thing. Now,
although the literal translation, he doesn't seem to give a judgment on it,
right.
But he's saying
that's how.
Right. He doesn't say whether it's good or bad.
Right. So the question is, this is exactly the question. What Rabbi Eliezer says, is it just a qualifier of the previous opinions, or it's an opinion by itself? So some commentators say it's just qualifying the previous discussion. He says, whatever opinion you follow, whether you follow Rabban Gamliel with the full tefillah every day, whether you follow Rabbi Yoshua with the abridged tefillah every day, or whether you follow the compromise of Rabbi Akiva, that either full or abridged tefillah, make sure that you don't consider the tefillah a burden, but rather you invest it with meaning and tahanunim. This is one way to see it. Another way to see it is because Rabbi Eliezer was usually of different opinions of all the other Hachamim, and he represented the ancient halakha. At a certain point, they excommunicated him. This is what happens to anyone who disagrees with others, especially in the time of the Mishnah. He was put in ban, in harem, and they call him Shamuti. He's because it's from the house of Shammai, and also means Shamuti is under a ban, under excommunication. What he says, if we take it in this way, is, I disagree with you. He says to all those rabbis, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yoshua, he says, don't do that. He says, don't establish a tefillah that you call tefillah Shmona Esrei. He disagrees with them. Why? He says, because we'll end up with tefillat keva. You are going to lose the personal touch of tefillah. But he was overruled. They didn't listen to him. Now, if you go one Mishnah before that, we'll find something else that also people took as a self-standing statement unrelated to the mahloket, and that is this. Rabbi Nehunיה ben Akana היה מתפלל בכניסתו לבית המדרש וביציאתו תפילה קצרה. Rabbi Nehunיה ben Akana, who used to pray when he would go into the Beit HaMidrash to study Torah, not just to study Torah, to study and to issue a ruling, a halachic ruling, because people would come to ask questions. So when he entered, he would say tefillah, and when he would leave, he would say tefillah. Amru lo, ma makom litefillah zo? So people asked him, what is your prayer? What are you doing? אמר להם, בכניסתי אני מתפלל שלא תארע תקלה על ידי, וביציאתי אני נותן הודיה על חלקי. He says, when I come in, I pray to God that I will not cause damage to anyone through my ruling, because I have responsibility. וביציאתי אני נותן הודיה על חלקי. And when I leave, I praise God and thank God for having a good day in the Beit HaMidrash. It's interesting that the Baraita in the Talmud takes it to a different direction. It says he prays to always be correct, so he will not cause his friends to rejoice when he makes a mistake. And that creates a very negative light. This fits more, by the way, the Babylonian Bet Midrash. The rabbi said that the Babylonian was more cantankerous, more always fighting than the Eretz Israel Bet Midrash. So everybody's jealous of each other and they're waiting for the other one to make a mistake. So when he goes in, he prays to God, please let me not make a mistake and make my friends happy in a negative way. Anyway, the pshat of it is not that. He just says, I'm going now to study and to be a judge, and people depend on me, I need to be responsible. Okay, so people took this Mishnah, as I said, independently. It's a self-standing statement. It's a nice anecdote that Rabbi Nehunיה ben Akana, in addition to the daily prayers, would say his own tefillah. And as a result, what happened was that this tefillah took a life of its own. They expanded it. The tefillah has a longer version. יהי רצון מלפניך אדוני אלוהי שלא ירע דבר תקלה על ידי ולא יקשה לדבר הלכה וישמחו בחבריי ולא אמר אל תמא טהור ואל תטהור טמא ולא יקשתו חבריו בדבר הלכה וישמח בהם. So it says all this that I mentioned before, let me not make a mistake. And then when he leaves, he says, this is the version that we say at Siyuma when we finish the Masechet, which is, thank you God for letting me be one of those who study Torah and not those who sit at the corner of the street. I wake up, they wake up. I wake up to study Torah, they wake up to do nonsense. I work and they work. I work to get a reward. They work and they get nothing. And it's a very negative formula that make people feel that, okay, if you study Torah, you have the crown of the universe, and everyone else is not worth it. Where originally it meant people who go to the Bet HaMidrash for practical purposes, to judge and to rule on halakha, and the Shvei Krano, those who sit in the corners, are really people who do nothing during the day, not working people. But if we take it into context of the whole chapter of the Mishnah, we realize that it's not a self-standing Mishnah, because the Mishnah starts saying, Perek Mishnah Aleph, you have to pray in the morning up until midday, or 4 hours after sunrise. Then they give the time of the tefillot. And then the next Mishnah says you pray 18 or a bridge version and so on. In between, out of nowhere, we have this Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda ben Akana, who says, I pray when I go into the Bet HaMidrash and when I leave the Bet HaMidrash. So it's another dissenting opinion. Just like Rabbi Eliezer said, don't make a Shmoneh Esrei, don't make this established tefillah because it will cause people to lose this spiritual connection. Rabbi Yehuda ben Akana said, you don't need that. You could do what I do, which is only when you go in the morning to work, say, I wish that everything will go well today. He happens to work in the Bet HaMidrash because he was a judge. But what he was saying is to everyone, whatever your work is, right? This is what you do. And there's interesting twist on that by Rabbi Israel Salanter, who was the founder of the Musar movement about 170, 180 years ago. The Midrash says about Hanoch. Hanoch mentions in the book of Bereshit. Vaitalech Hanoch et Elohim ve'enenu ki lakach oto Elohim. Hanoch walked with God and he was gone because God took him. Literal meaning of the pasuk is Hanoch was very young, was only 365 years old, which corresponds to the days of the solar year. And the average, lifespan was 700 and 800 years. So he's a toddler basically. So that's why lakach oto Elohim ala achadu ala abbahu. So it's like we don't know what happened. But the rabbis, made it into an interesting thing. They said Hanoch was a special person. He was tofer min alim, ve'al kol min alu min al haya me'ahed yihudim. He was a shoemaker, and he would say special prayers, bihudim, as it would make the stitches. So most commentators see it as something mystical, that the stitches, when he connects one part to another, one piece of leather, he is connecting the upper worlds to each other. Rabbi Israel Salanter says none of this nonsense. What they say is that when he would make the shoes, he would pray to God that he will produce something good, that the clients will be happy, and that he will not end up deceiving them. And this was Rabbi Yehuda ben Akana says. So that whatever I'm going to do today, whatever my field of my line of work is, let it be successful and productive and not cause damage to others. That's a great tefillah, because now all your day is guided with this idea of I am going to help others. So to sum it up, we have the center Mishnah, which says either 18 or a short version or a choice between the two, but it's flanked by two other Mishnayot that disagree with it. One says, just say a short tefillah before you start working, and Rabbi Eliezer says, don't turn your tefillah into a burden because you're going to lose the spiritual connection. All, of course, is theoretical, and to each his own.